At 40 years old, Xander Wallace had built a life on the principles of silence and precision. As a senior mergers and acquisitions partner for Sinclair Broadcast Group, a position that afforded him a quiet net worth of over $50 million, he dealt in the seismic shifting of corporate empires, all conducted in the hushed tones of confidential conference rooms. His world was one of numbers, of long-term strategy, of understanding that the most powerful moves were the ones no one saw coming. He had thought his marriage to Nyanna was built on a similar foundation of quiet strength. He had been wrong. The proof was waiting for him at 6:15 p.m. on a damp Wednesday evening in early November. As he turned his 2020 Acura MDX, a sensible $45,000 family vehicle, onto the cobblestone driveway of their $2.8 million Roland Park estate, a cold knot formed in his stomach. The rain had started, a fine, miserable mist that blurred the warm lights of the house. And there, sitting starkly on the covered flagstone porch, were his things. Not all of them, but enough to make the statement clear. His two large black Toomey suitcases, a set that had cost him $2,100 5 years ago, were packed and zipped. Beside them sat his leather briefcase, a $950 Shinola piece he'd received for his 10th anniversary at the firm, and a single, solitary banker's box containing the items from his home office. He parked the car, the engine's silence suddenly deafening. For a long moment, he just sat there, his hands resting on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, watching the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers. He was a man who had orchestrated $100 million hostile takeovers without his heart rate exceeding 80 beats per minute. Yet looking at that pathetic pile of his belongings, he felt a profound and hollow stillness. When he finally stepped out of the car, the humid air felt heavy on his skin. He walked up the 3 steps to the porch, his well-worn $250 Johnston & Murphy dress shoes making no sound. The front door opened before he reached it. Nyanna stood there, framed in the doorway like a queen surveying her domain. She was wearing a stunning, form-fitting crimson dress, a $3,400 piece from Roland Mouret she'd bought for this exact occasion. Her hair, a cascade of elegant, tight coils, was perfectly styled, and on her wrist, the $18,000 Cartier tank watch he'd bought for her last birthday glinted under the porch light. Her expression was not angry, not sad. It was triumphant. "Xander," she said, her voice smooth and cool, lacking any of the warmth it had held just that morning. "I think it's best if you collect your things. I've made arrangements for the rest to be sent to a storage unit." He said nothing. He simply looked at her, then at the bags, then back at her. His deep brown skin, usually radiant with a quiet energy, seemed to absorb the dim light, his face an unreadable mask. "I closed the deal today, Xander," she continued, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "The $50 million commercial portfolio. My commission alone is $1.5 million. That's more than you've made in salary for the past 3 years combined." She took a step forward, the fabric of her expensive dress rustling. "We're not in the same league anymore. I'm on a different level now, and I can't be held back. I need a partner who matches my ambition, not one who is content to push papers in a stuffy office. I'm above you now. This is over." Xander's gaze remained steady. He looked into the eyes of the woman he had loved for 12 years, the woman he had supported, encouraged, and financed. He saw a stranger. He didn't see pain or regret. He saw only the cold, hard gleam of avarice. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He did not ask why. He did not argue. He did not beg. He simply bent down, picked up his 2 suitcases and his briefcase, and walked back to his car without a word. He had no idea what was coming, but she had made a critical mistake. She thought the game was over. For Xander, it was just beginning. What have you done to deserve this? Tell us in the comments if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted. We'll be reading every single one. The facade had been built with impeccable care over 12 years. Xander remembered the day they bought the house in Roland Park. It was a sprawling colonial, all white brick and black shutters, a monument to old Baltimore money. Nyanna had fallen in love with it instantly. "This is a statement house, Xan," she'd said, her eyes wide with desire as they stood in the cavernous, empty foyer. "This says we've arrived." He hadn't needed a statement. His quiet confidence came from his balance sheet, from the respect he commanded in boardrooms, from the complex multi-billion-dollar deals he structured with the calm precision of a watchmaker. But he loved her, and her happiness was his. So he'd liquidated $1.2 million in premarital stocks and paid for the majority of the down payment. The mortgage, a staggering $18,000 a month, was easily covered by his income, but they'd agreed it was their house. He filled it with the things she wanted: a gleaming 6-burner Wolf range that cost $15,000, even though neither of them cooked much beyond simple pasta; a $12,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator that was mostly filled with bottles of expensive champagne and sparkling water. He remembered assembling the $7,000 Restoration Hardware cloud sofa himself on a Saturday, sweating in his jeans, while she directed him from a lounge chair, sipping an iced tea. "A little to the left, baby. It has to be perfectly centered." Her transition from a moderately successful corporate lawyer to a high-end real estate broker had been his idea. She was miserable at her firm, complaining about the billable hours and the thankless partners. "You have the charisma, Nee," he'd told her over dinner one night at the Capitol Grill, a $400 meal he'd paid for. "You can sell anything to anyone. You should be selling dreams." Her face had lit up. The next week, he'd written a check for $150,000 from his personal savings account to cover her startup costs: the brokerage license fees, the branding, the website development, the rent on a small but prestigious office space in a glass-fronted building on Pratt Street. He never called it a loan. It was an investment in her happiness. For the first few years, he was her silent partner, her biggest cheerleader. He would spend hours on Sunday nights reviewing her contracts, using his razor-sharp legal mind to find clauses and loopholes she'd missed, saving her clients and her reputation multiple times. He never charged a fee. He did it because he was her husband. In those early days, their life had a comfortable rhythm. He'd wake at 5:30 a.m. and make coffee, bringing a cup to her in bed. He'd leave for his Hunt Valley office before the sun was up, and she would call him around noon, bubbly and excited about a showing or a potential listing. Their evenings were quiet. They'd sit on that enormous cloud sofa, her feet in his lap, watching some generic drama on their $8,000 flat-screen TV. It felt stable. It felt real. He thought they were building a life, not just a portfolio of expensive assets. But the shift began subtly, about 18 months ago. It started with small comments, little barbs disguised as jokes. Her deals were getting bigger, moving from high 6-figure homes to multi-million-dollar commercial properties. With each success, a little more the woman he married seemed to chip away. Replaced by a harder, more brittle version, he remembered a dinner party they'd hosted for some of her new wealthy clients, a developer and his wife. Xander was in the kitchen plating appetizers when he overheard Nyanna talking in the living room. "Oh, Xander?" she'd said with a light, dismissive laugh. "He works in finance. It's all very stable. He moves numbers around on a spreadsheet. Me? I change the skyline. I build empires." The developer had chuckled politely. Xander felt a cold sting. He'd just finished a grueling 3-month negotiation to acquire a portfolio of television stations worth $1.7 billion. His bonus from that single deal was more than her entire year's commissions, but he would never say that. His work was confidential, and his success was not a weapon. The jabs became more frequent, more personal. She started making comments about his appearance, his watch, an $89 Timex Expedition he'd worn for years because it was practical and reliable, became a source of her embarrassment. "Can't you at least wear something that looks like you belong in this house?" she'd asked one morning, gesturing with the wrist that held her new Cartier. "It's pathetic." He'd simply put the watch in his drawer and stopped wearing one altogether. It was easier than fighting. The true cruelty, the moment he later realized was the beginning of the end, came on a rainy Tuesday about 4 months before she kicked him out. She had been on the phone all day, locked in her home office, the door firmly shut. He could hear her voice, sharp and commanding, as she worked on the preliminary negotiations for the $50 million deal. The deal that would, in her mind, finally catapult her into the stratosphere. He had made her favorite dinner, pan-seared salmon with asparagus. He set the table in their formal dining room, the one with the $10,000 mahogany table and the chandelier that looked like a crystal explosion. He lit candles. He opened a $150 bottle of wine. He wanted to reconnect, to find the woman he'd married beneath the layers of ambition. She finally emerged from her office at 9 p.m., her phone still pressed to her ear. She walked right past the dining room without a glance. He stood there, holding a plate. As she went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. "Dinner's ready, Nee," he said softly. She held up a hand to silence him, still listening to the person on the phone. After a moment, she hung up and let out an exasperated sigh. "I can't eat now, Xander. I'm too wired. This deal is massive. You wouldn't understand the pressure." "I think I would," he said, his voice even. "My job involves some pressure, too." She turned to him, and her eyes were cold steel. "Your job? Xander, please, you sit in meetings. You have a team of analysts to do the real work. You've been in the same position for a decade. It's comfortable. It's stagnant. I am out here, on my own, building something from nothing. This isn't the same. It will never be the same." She looked at the beautifully set table, at the candles flickering, at the meal he had carefully prepared. A look of something like pity crossed her face. "This is sweet, Xan. Really, it's what you're good at. The domestic stuff, taking care of things. But I'm past this. I've outgrown it. I've outgrown you." She left the kitchen, leaving him standing alone in the vast, silent house, the smell of cooling salmon hanging in the air. He looked at the two-place settings, the gleaming silver, the crystal glasses. He had felt it then, a deep, tectonic shift beneath the foundation of their marriage. The facade wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. He just hadn't realized how quickly the demolition was scheduled to happen. He ate his dinner alone, the silence of the $10,000 dining table his only companion. The morning of the betrayal began with a phone call at 10:47 a.m. Xander was in his office on the 12th floor of the Sinclair building in Hunt Valley, a sleek tower of glass and steel that overlooked the rolling Maryland hills. He was in a meeting with his legal team, finalizing the wire transfer instructions for a major acquisition. His phone, a company-issued iPhone 13, buzzed on the polished granite conference table. It was Nyanna. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. "I did it." Her voice was electric, a high-voltage current of pure triumph. "I did it, Xander. We just left the title company. The deal is closed. $50 million. "Congratulations, Nye," he said, his voice a calm counterpoint to her hysteria. "I knew you could do it." "Knew I could do it? Oh, this is so much more than that. This changes everything. Everything," she gushed. "I'm having a celebratory lunch with my team at the Ocean Air. Don't wait up for me tonight. I'll be out late celebrating. We deserve this. I deserve this." He could hear the clinking of glasses in the background, the buzz of excited voices. She was already living in her new reality. "I'm proud of you," he said, and it was true. In a detached, clinical way, he was proud of the broker she had become, even if he no longer recognized the woman. "Talk later, Zan. I have to go. My new life is waiting," she said, and the line went dead. He stood in the hallway for a moment, the phone cool in his hand. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the gray, overcast sky. His new life was waiting too. He walked back into the conference room. His lead counsel, a sharp woman named Alani, looked up from a stack of documents. "Everything all right, Xander?" "Everything is proceeding as planned," he said, sitting back down at the head of the table. "Let's review the wire instructions one last time. I want this transfer executed by 3 p.m. precisely." Alani slid a document across the table. It was the final directive for the $50 million wire transfer. He scanned the details. The seller's corporate entity, the property portfolio's legal description, the routing numbers. And at the bottom, under the section labeled Acquiring Party, was the name of the LLC he had created for this very purpose, funded entirely by his own premarital assets, an entity Nyanna had never heard of. Sinclair Xander Holdings, LLC. He had known for 6 weeks. His team had been approached by a business broker representing the seller of a portfolio of commercial properties in the Baltimore-Washington corridor. It was a prime opportunity, undervalued, and perfectly aligned with Sinclair's diversification strategy. When he saw the name of the listing brokerage firm, Nyanna's firm, his heart had sunk. He knew this was her whale. The deal she'd been chasing for a year, he could have passed, assigned it to another partner. But a cold, calculating part of his mind, the part that had made him a legend in the M&A world, took over. He saw the endgame with stunning clarity. He instructed his team to proceed under a veil of absolute secrecy, creating the new holding company to act as the buyer, ensuring no link back to Sinclair, and certainly not to him, would be visible to the seller's side. He had watched from his silent, glass-walled perch as his own wife worked tirelessly to sell a $50 million property to him. He listened to her complain about the demanding buyers, their inscrutable lawyers, their incessant requests for due diligence. He was that buyer. His lawyers were those lawyers. He felt a grim, hollow ache as he played his part, pretending to be nothing more than a supportive, distant husband. Now the final act was in motion. The wire was sent at 2:58 p.m. At 6:15 p.m., he arrived home to find his life packed into 2 suitcases and a box. The scene on the porch played out in slow motion in his mind. Her words, each one a perfectly polished stone of contempt, thrown at him. "I'm above you now. I can't be held back. We're not in the same league anymore." He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie. He registered the details. The way the light caught the diamond on her finger. A 3-carat, $120,000 stone he had painstakingly selected. The faint scent of her $400 Chanel perfume. The rigid set of her shoulders in that expensive crimson dress. He didn't defend himself. He didn't reveal his hand. To do so would be to engage in a messy, emotional confrontation. And that was her world, not his. His world was one of leverage, of timing, of executing a plan with chilling precision. Arguing on the porch was a losing move. The winning move was silence. The winning move was a strategic retreat. He loaded his bags into the back of his Acura. The banker's box, containing a few personal photos, his favorite coffee mug, and the deal toy from his first major acquisition, sat on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. As he closed the driver's side door, he looked back at the house, one last time. Nyanna was still standing in the doorway, watching him, her arms crossed, a look of unshakable certainty on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had shed her dead weight and was ascending to a new orbit. She had no idea that her rocket was fueled by his money, and he was about to cut the engine. He put the car in reverse and drove away into the rain, not looking back. 3 hours later, at 9:22 p.m., Nyanna was alone in the $2.8 million house that now felt like a cathedral built in her own honor. The silence was vast, broken only by the gentle hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the soft patter of rain against the oversized windows. She had done it. She had finally purged the last remnant of her old, smaller life. Xander, with his sensible car and his boring watch and his quiet, maddening stability, was gone. She kicked off her $200 Christian Louboutin heels and walked barefoot across the cold Italian marble of the foyer. In her hand, she held a delicate, long-stemmed crystal flute, a baccarat glass from a set of 6 that cost $900. It was filled to the brim with Dom Perignon, a $300 bottle she had been saving for this exact moment. She took a long, slow sip, the bubbles bursting on her tongue, a taste of pure victory. She drifted into the grand living room, the one with the 20-foot ceilings and the massive cloud sofa. She felt powerful, untethered, magnificent. The commission, $1.5 million, would hit her account in the morning. With that, she could do anything. She could expand her brokerage, buy a vacation home in Miami, perhaps trade in her Mercedes for a Bentley. The possibilities were intoxicating. Xander had become an anchor, a reminder of a time when she was less. Now, she was more. Feeling a delicious need to look upon the proof of her triumph, she retrieved her sleek $2,500 MacBook Air from her home office and settled into the corner of the enormous sofa. She was going to frame the final settlement statement, a $50 million trophy to hang on her wall. She opened her email. There it was, a message from the title company sent at 3:15 p.m. with the subject line, "Fully executed commercial portfolio sale." Attached was a 48-page PDF. She clicked it open, a giddy smile on her face. She scrolled through the familiar pages, her eyes glazing over the dense legal text. She wasn't reading, just basking in the glow of the numbers. She saw her brokerage firm's name listed, her name as the agent of record. She saw the final sale price, $50,000. A beautiful, perfect number. She scrolled down to the disbursement page, the part that showed where the money came from. It was a formality, a final confirmation of the wire transfer that had funded the entire transaction. Her eyes scanned the familiar details, the bank routing numbers, the account information for the seller. Then her gaze landed on the line item detailing the source of funds. Payee, Sinclair Xander Holdings, LLC. Her brain didn't process it at first. The name was a strange jumble of words. Sinclair. That was Xander's company. A strange coincidence, she thought. Maybe they had a subsidiary with a similar name. But then her eyes fixed on the second word. Xander. The name seemed to leap off the screen, pulsing with a malevolent energy. Her smile vanished. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart, which had been soaring with triumph just moments before, seized in her chest and began to plummet. It couldn't be. Her fingers, suddenly clumsy and numb, flew across the trackpad, scrolling frantically back through the document. She searched for the signatory page for the buyer. Her eyes scanned the black, inscrutable signature on the line, and beneath it, the typed name. Xander Wallace, Managing Partner, Sinclair Xander Holdings, LLC. The baccarat flute slipped from her nerveless fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling end over end, before shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the house. The last of the expensive champagne pooled on the pristine white stone, the bubbles dying with a faint fizz. She stared at the screen, her mind a vortex of confusion and horror. Xander, her Xander, her quiet, stable, unambitious husband was the silent, mysterious buyer. The entire time she had been battling the difficult buyer's representatives, she had been battling his team. The entire time she had been celebrating her ascent, she had been standing on a platform he had built, a platform he controlled. The triumphant narrative she had constructed for herself, the story of her brilliant solo flight to the top, evaporated in an instant. She wasn't the conqueror. She was the court jester, performing for a king she didn't even know was in the room. The $50 million deal hadn't been her ticket to freedom. It had been his money, a transaction moving from one of his pockets to another, and she was just the paid intermediary. Worse, the commission, the glorious $1.5 million that was the foundation of her new life, was now tainted. It was money earned from a deal with her own husband, marital property, a fact that would be glaringly obvious in any divorce proceeding. The blood drained from her face. The crimson dress suddenly felt like a costume for a fool. The enormous, silent house was no longer her palace. It was a gilded cage he had paid for. She thought back to his face on the porch just 3 hours earlier. The calmness, the utter lack of surprise or anger, the quiet, unnerving composure. He knew. He had known the entire time. He had watched her preen and posture, listened to her condescending monologue, and had said nothing. He had let her walk right into the trap she had set for herself. A wave of nausea washed over her. She stumbled to her feet, staring at the shattered glass and the spreading pool of champagne on the floor. The celebration was over. A cold, terrifying dread began to creep in, a dread that tasted far more bitter than the most expensive wine. She was not on a new level. She was in free fall, and she had just realized she had cut her own parachute. While Nyanna's world was shattering, Xander was sitting in the warm, cluttered living room of his brother's apartment in Federal Hill. The contrast with his Roland Park home was stark and immediate. Bryson's place was a second-floor walk-up in a historic brick row house, the kind of apartment that held the echoes of 100 years of life. The floors creaked, the walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and brewing coffee. It was a home, not a showroom. Bryson, a high school history teacher with their father's easy smile and their mother's sharp, intelligent eyes, handed Xander a bottle of beer. It was a local craft brew, a Heavy Seas loose cannon that cost about $2 a bottle. It tasted better than any of the $300 champagne Nyanna kept chilled. "So walk me through it again," Bryson said, sinking into a well-worn leather armchair that had probably cost $500 a decade ago and was now priceless in its comfort. Xander took a slow sip of his beer. He recounted the day's events in his typical methodical fashion. The triumphant phone call from Nyanna, the final execution of the wire transfer, the scene on the porch, the bags, her final words. He laid it all out without emotion, like a lawyer presenting a case. Bryson listened patiently, his expression hardening with each detail. When Xander finished, Bryson shook his head slowly, a look of profound disbelief and anger on his face. His hair, styled in neat, short locks, seemed to bristle with indignation. "She did what?" he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything? After you paid for her to start that whole business? After you coached her and supported her? She closes one big deal, a deal it turns out you handed her, and she thinks she can just throw you out like trash?" "That appears to be the summary of it, yes," Xander said calmly. "And you just let her? You didn't say anything? You didn't tell her it was your money?" "What would have been the point?" Xander asked, looking at his brother. "To have a screaming match on the front lawn? To give her the satisfaction of a fight?" "She made her choice, Bryson. She showed me exactly who she is. I have no interest in trying to change her mind." His composure was absolute. A still lake, reflecting a burning building. His pain was there, deep and cold. But it was a private country, its borders sealed. Bryson stood up and began to pace the small living room. So what now? You just let her get away with this? No, Xander said. The single word hung in the air, cold and heavy. He reached for his Shinola briefcase, laid it flat on the coffee table between them, and clicked open the brass latches. He pulled out a slim file folder. Now we execute the plan. He laid out 3 documents on the table. The first was their prenuptial agreement, signed 12 years ago. It clearly stipulated that all premarital assets, and any growth thereof, remained separate property. The second was a series of brokerage statements tracing the $50 million funding for the acquisition directly back to a portfolio of stocks he had inherited from his grandfather long before he'd ever met Nyanna. The third was a copy of the final settlement statement for the property deal, the very same document Nyanna was likely looking at in horror at that exact moment. He tapped his finger on the signatory line. Bryson leaned over, his eyes scanning the papers. He let out a low whistle. This is devastating, Xan. Airtight. Precision matters, Xander said simply. I'm meeting with Julian Croft on Friday morning. Bryson's eyebrows shot up. Julian Croft was legendary in Baltimore legal circles, a silver-haired shark known for handling the most complex high-asset divorces in the state. His hourly rate was rumored to be $1,500. You're not playing around, Bryson said, a slow smile spreading across his face. He finally understood. This wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic repositioning before a counteroffensive. The meeting with Julian Croft took place 2 days later on Friday in a quiet, wood-paneled office overlooking the inner harbor. Croft, a tall, impeccably dressed black man in his late 60s, listened intently as Xander laid out the facts, his voice never wavering. He presented the documents with the same dispassionate clarity he'd used with his brother. Croft reviewed the prenup, the brokerage statements, and the acquisition paperwork. He tented his long fingers, a glint in his sharp eyes. Mr. Wallace, he said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone. In my 40 years of practicing family law, I have seen a great deal of hubris and a great deal of foolishness. But your wife's timing is truly remarkable. She has, in a single action, handed you the perfect, unassailable case. He leaned back in his $9,000 leather chair. She terminated the marriage, on record by her own admission, on the basis of a financial windfall, a windfall that she believes elevates her beyond you. The irony that this windfall was entirely funded by your separate protected property is a legal gift. A beautiful, beautiful gift. What are my options? Xander asked. Options? Croft chuckled. Your options are to file for divorce on Monday morning. We will attach this settlement statement as Exhibit A. We will argue that her commission, while technically marital property, was earned in a transaction that constitutes a fundamental breach of trust, though we don't even need to go that far. The facts are the facts. The $1.5 million is marital. It gets split. She receives $750,000, from which she will have to pay her own legal fees, which will be substantial when she realizes the hole she's in. The Roland Park house is marital property. It will be sold and the equity divided. Everything else, your Sinclair equity, your retirement accounts, your premarital holdings, and of course, the $50 million commercial portfolio she so graciously sold you, remains yours, untouchable. Croft leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. She played a high-stakes poker game with a stacked deck, and she didn't realize you owned the casino. We will file at 9 a.m. Monday. She'll be served before lunch. Xander nodded, a sense of grim finality settling over him. This wasn't about revenge. He felt no joy, only a profound sense of sorrow for the marriage that had died long before the bags appeared on his porch. This was about accountability. It was about consequences. It was about closing a chapter with the same precision and finality he brought to every other deal in his life. He was closing the deal on his marriage. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn clearness, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The rain and gloom of the previous week had been scrubbed clean. At 9:01 a.m., Julian Croft's paralegal electronically filed the divorce petition with the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. The strike was officially underway. At 11:30 a.m., Nyanna was holding court in the glass-walled main conference room of her brokerage firm. After a weekend of panicked paralysis, she had decided on a strategy of brazen denial. She would act as if nothing was wrong. She would project an aura of supreme confidence, convincing herself and her team that she was still the queen she'd believed herself to be last Wednesday. She was dressed in an $8,700 Armani power suit, the color of cream, a statement of untouchable elegance. She was laughing with her two junior agents, regaling them with a slightly embellished story about her big closing. "The buyer's team was absolutely relentless," she said, leaning back in her chair, "but I held firm. You have to show them who's in control. You never, ever let them see you sweat." It was at that moment that a man appeared in the open doorway of the conference room. He was nondescript, in a simple gray suit that probably cost less than $300, holding a large manila envelope. "Nyanna Wallace?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. Nyanna's smile froze. "Yes, can I help you?" she asked, her tone laced with annoyance at the interruption. "You've been served," the man said simply. He stepped forward, placed the thick envelope on the polished surface of the conference table, and turned and walked away without another word. The laughter in the room died. The two junior agents stared, their eyes wide, first at the envelope and then at Nyanna. The silence was thick and heavy. For a moment, Nyanna just stared at the package as if it were a venomous snake. Her carefully constructed facade of supreme confidence began to crack. With a trembling hand, she reached for the envelope. Her name and the address of her office were typed neatly on the front. In the top left corner was the return address for the law firm of Croft, Peterson and Associates. Her blood ran cold. She knew the name. Everyone in her world knew that name. It was the firm you hired when you wanted to leave the other party with nothing but dust. She tore the envelope open, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. The top sheet read, in stark, bold letters, "Petition for absolute divorce." She gasped, a small choked sound. Her agents exchanged a nervous glance. She frantically flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the dense legalese. She saw Xander's name as the petitioner. She saw the date of separation listed as last Wednesday. And then she got to the end of the petition, to the list of exhibits. Exhibit A. Final settlement statement, commercial portfolio sale, dated November 8th. Her vision tunneled. The walls of the glass conference room seemed to be closing in on her. The suit that had felt like armor a moment ago now felt like a straitjacket. Her carefully crafted narrative, her image, her entire world, all of it was incinerated by that single line of text. He had attached the proof. He was using her greatest triumph as the primary weapon for her destruction. The humiliation was absolute, and it was public. Her junior agents were witnessing the precise moment of her downfall. She shot to her feet, knocking her chair over with a loud clatter. Without a word, she grabbed her purse and the papers and fled the conference room, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The voicemail started at 12:15 p.m., As Xander sat in his temporary office at Sinclair, a small, quiet space his assistant had prepared for him. He had instructed his brother and his lawyer to handle all communication. He would not speak to her. He let every call go to his voicemail, a series of digital messages that would serve as a real-time record of her collapse. Voicemail 1, 12:15 p.m. Rage. Xander, you bastard. You absolute bastard. How dare you? After everything I did for us, you try to humiliate me like this. You think you can blindside me with some high-priced lawyer? You have no idea who you're dealing with. You will regret this. Voicemail 2, 1:30 p.m. Threats and justification. I just spoke to a lawyer. You can't do this. That commission is mine. I earned it. You think you can touch my money? I will fight you on this, Xander. I will drag your name through the mud. I will tell everyone what a weak, pathetic man you are, hiding behind your corporate shield. You set me up. Voicemail 3, 3:45 p.m. Bargaining. Xander, pick up the phone. Please, let's just talk, okay? There's been a misunderstanding. I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean. The deal? The pressure was immense. We can work this out. I don't want a divorce. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. Voicemail 4, 6:10 p.m. Pleading and realization. Her voice is strained, cracking. Please, Xander, I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I was an idiot. I was so stupid. I didn't mean any of it. I love you. Don't you know that? The house, the money, it means nothing without you. Please just call me back. Voicemail 5, 9:52 p.m. Desperation and sobbing. The sound of ragged, weeping breaths. I saw the exhibit, Exhibit A. You planned it. The whole time. You knew. You let me. You watched me. Oh God, what have I done? Xander, the commission. The lawyer said it's marital property. It will be split. It's all I have. Please, please don't take it all. You can't? Please. Xander listened to each message once, his face impassive. He saved them to a secure file and forwarded the audio to Julian Croft. He felt no satisfaction, no pleasure in her pain. He felt only the quiet, grim finality of a necessary amputation. The disease had been identified. The limb had been severed. Now all that was left was the long, slow process of healing. The consequences for Nyanna cascaded with the brutal efficiency of a controlled demolition. Each pillar of the life she had so proudly built was kicked out from under her one by one, the downfall enumerated in legal documents and whispered gossip throughout Baltimore's elite circles. First came the financial collapse. The $1.5 million commission, the bedrock of her new empire, was indeed marital property. Julian Croft's legal motion was swift and unopposed. The funds were frozen, then divided precisely in half by court order. Nyanna was left with $750,000 before taxes. From that, she had to pay her own legal team, who, seeing the weakness of her position, demanded a hefty $150,000 retainer up front. After taxes and legal fees, her grand windfall was reduced to less than $400,000. It was a substantial amount of money, but it was a pittance compared to the lifestyle she had built. The Roland Park house, her $2.8 million symbol of arrival, became an anchor, dragging her to the bottom. She couldn't afford the $18,000 monthly mortgage and the $4,000 in property taxes and upkeep on her own. Within 2 months, a for sale sign was staked into the perfectly manicured lawn. The house sat on the market for 4 months, a public testament to her failure. When it finally sold for slightly below asking price, the remaining equity was split. Her share, after paying off the mortgage, was just over $300,000. Her entire kingdom had been liquidated into a sum that wouldn't even buy a one-bedroom condo in the same neighborhood. Her professional life crumbled next. The story of her divorce, and the spectacular irony at its core, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of high-end real estate and finance. She was no longer seen as a brilliant, self-made power broker. She was a cautionary tale, a punchline at cocktail parties. Clients, especially the wealthy, discreet ones she coveted, began to pull their listings. They couldn't trust her judgment or her character. Why would you entrust the sale of your $8 million estate to a woman who was so easily and publicly duped? Her brokerage, once a rising star, began to bleed agents. Within a year, she was forced to let go of her prestigious Pratt Street office, downsizing to a small shared workspace in a less desirable part of town. The listings on her website shifted from sprawling estates to modest suburban townhomes. The social fallout was just as devastating. The circle of friends she had cultivated, the developers, the society wives, the charity board members, distanced themselves with polite, cool precision. The invitations to galas stopped coming. Her calls went unreturned. She had built her social standing on the perception of her success and her marriage to the quiet, powerful man from Sinclair. With both gone, she had nothing to offer them. She was an outcast, a ghost haunting the edges of a world she had so desperately wanted to conquer. She traded her $90,000 Mercedes G-Class for a used Lexus sedan. She moved into a generic two-bedroom rental apartment in Towson, a place with beige carpets and cheap particle board closets where her $3,400 dresses and $8,700 suits hung like relics from a forgotten dynasty. The Cartier watch was sold to pay a tax bill. The grand, triumphant life she had envisioned for herself on that rainy Wednesday evening had evaporated, leaving behind only the bitter residue of her own pride. She had flown too close to a sun she didn't realize her husband owned, and her wax wings had melted in the most spectacular fashion. Have you ever seen someone's pride lead to their downfall? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could help someone else see the warning signs. 2 years passed. The sharp edges of the betrayal had softened for Xander, worn smooth by the steady passage of time and the quiet construction of a new, more authentic life. The divorce had been finalized with clinical speed. He had given Nyanna her half of the marital assets without a fight. He wanted nothing from that life but his freedom and his peace. He never moved back into the Roland Park house. He sold it, took his half of the proceeds, and invested it in a charitable fund. His home was now the premarital Federal Hill property he had owned for years, a beautiful 3-story brick row house that he had meticulously restored. It was a house with character and history, its warmth emanating from the original hardwood floors and the books that lined its walls, not from the price tag of its furniture. His brother Bryson lived just 3 blocks away, and their Sunday dinners became a cherished ritual. At Sinclair, his career continued its quiet, upward trajectory, but his perspective had shifted. The thrill of the multi-billion-dollar deal had been replaced by a deeper sense of purpose. He used his position and his capital to launch a mentorship program within the company, specifically for young, promising Black M&A analysts recruited from historically Black colleges and universities like Morgan State and Howard. He saw his younger self in them, brilliant, ambitious, but in need of a guide through the labyrinth of corporate finance. He found a profound satisfaction in teaching them, in sharing the hard-won wisdom of his career. He would sit with them for hours, not in the main boardroom, but in a small, comfortable conference room, breaking down complex deal structures, coaching them on negotiation tactics, and, most importantly, talking about the integrity of the work. Your reputation, he told them, is your most valuable asset. It's the one thing you can't put a price on, and the one thing you can never buy back once it's lost. His evenings were his own. He would often leave the glass tower of his office and drive down to Fort McHenry. He'd walk the sea-wall path, the cool breeze from the Patapsco River on his face, and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple behind the city skyline. It was here, in the quiet solitude of the historic park, that he felt the last vestiges of his anger and hurt finally release their hold on him. He watched the massive container ships gliding toward the port, symbols of a world of commerce that moved on, indifferent and constant. One evening, while scrolling through a real estate app out of old habit, he saw a new listing from Nyanna. It was a small, three-bedroom house in a middle-class suburb, listed for $350,000. Her professional headshot in the corner of the listing looked different. The triumphant, hard gleam in her eyes was gone, replaced by a strained, weary professionalism. He felt a flicker of something. Not anger, not satisfaction, but a quiet, distant pity for the woman who had traded a fortune in love and support for a handful of fool's gold. He closed the app. Her story was no longer his concern. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his. Forgiveness was the final transaction, the one that closed the books on his past and allowed him to fully own his future. He had his work, his brother, his mentees, and the quiet, unshakable peace of a man who knew his own worth, a worth that had never been tied to a house, a title, or a $50 million deal. True wealth, he now understood, isn't measured by the size of a single commission or the price of a watch. It isn't found in a statement house or a luxury car. Real wealth is built slowly, quietly, over time. It is the solid foundation of your own character, the integrity of your actions, and the richness of the lives you touch. Pride built on a foundation of ego is a house of cards, beautiful and impressive, but destined to collapse at the first real gust of wind. But a life built on a foundation of purpose and quiet strength is a fortress, unshakable and enduring. That is the only empire worth building. We all face moments that test our character. How do you define true wealth in your own life? Let's start a conversation in the comments about what truly matters. Your story matters, and we would love for you to subscribe and join our community.